Our next speaker is Damian Coory, and Damian is the host of an independent weekly video news show called The Other Side on YouTube, and he has a modest 500,000 viewers a month, so obviously there's a few people who are interested in what he has to say. He's a former director of Edelman Public Relations Agency, world leading, and he spent more than 35 years in senior roles in the media and corporate communications. He's got a number of things that he wants to talk about, but his presentation will focus principally on how the left, and particular feminism, has captured Australia's institutions, platforms of debate and national discourse. He's particularly concerned, being vastly experienced in the area, by the media's role in the demonisation of men and the almost universal unwillingness of the Australian media to challenge any of the dominant feminist assumptions that are so prevailing at the moment, no matter how increasingly divorced from reality and basic principles they have become. He has lived through the loss of freedom in Hong Kong, which I think had some profound effect on him. And Damian was horrified when he returned to Australia in 2020 at the lack of opinion diversity in the media and the lack of support for the correct narratives. He created The Other Side as a small contribution to providing a platform for many good people battling real social injustice who are denied a voice in the modern wave of woke lynching and hysteria. He's going to speak to you about trial by media and the impact of the court of public opinion upon those accused of sexual assault. Would you please welcome Damian Coory?
Great, thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Peter. It is true that we're doing pretty well on YouTube now. We could always do better, so please do tell your friends about The Other Side. But a small shoestring operation coming out of a studio in Redcliffe City, north of Brisbane, should not be beating the national broadcaster or commercial news networks on any of its video views, but we kind of are now, occasionally at least, enough times at least. What's really great is that a whopping 85% of our viewers are Australian. And that is something very uncommon for Australian YouTubers, because most Australian YouTubers have to do American content to actually get the clicks and get the numbers. And we, I can't stress enough the dangerous world we live in, where one company, Google, who own YouTube, have control over just about all the television that anyone in the world can watch, because YouTube is the new television and they do have absolute control. There are other platforms, but they cannot get a leg up. All right, so what I do want to say, though, is that if you fight and if you use all of your professional skills and you back the best people who've got those skills, you can make a significant change, even though we do live inside a culture of very self-interested politics, media and education. And we really do need to make change. Because while the presumption of innocence at law is critical, let's see if this works, yep, sorry. While the presumption of innocence at law is critical, as a famous media pioneer in the United States once said, politics and the law are downstream of culture. So we do need to fix the culture first. Andrew Breitbart's book, Righteous Indignation, whether you like his politics or not, is an exceptionally enlightened read. It tells the story of a justice crusader's shift from the traditional political left to the right as he grew up, but also of someone who was extremely politically and culturally switched on. Andrew died too soon and too young at just 43 after collapsing in 2012 on a street near his LA home. He'd been diagnosed with heart disease a year earlier, but his impact lives on. Before Trump, there was a grassroots political movement in the US designed to counter the rise of left-wing cultural influence before the word woke had even been invented. It was called the Tea Party movement, and Breitbart was a significant driver. He was the mentor of Steve Bannon, who was the media brains behind the first Trump campaign. We've been dutifully taught and told to hate all of these people, of course, in Australia, but they have had a phenomenal impact, which in Breitbart's case has long outlived him. Wikipedia says of him, Breitbart created Breitbart News, now a far-right news and opinion website which has been described as misogynistic, xenophobic and racist by academics and journalists. A more honourable testimony of a man's character I could not imagine. And then this. Breitbart was a proponent of the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, claiming that there are academics attempting to undermine Western culture. Well, we know that's a lie, so he's clearly a nutjob. The reputational attack and hit pieces and hatchet jobs were much worse when he was alive, I can assure you. The attacks levelled against this bloke would be enough to give anyone heart disease, sadly. This is because he was having an impact, and it still resonates today. And the feminists and their friends on the political left will fight any attack to their cultural dominance with ferocity. Of course, they are the nice side of our society. They are the sane, noble ones, fighting for ethical and moral goodness. So we need to understand that there is a cultural war going on, and as much as they like to paint the centre-right politicians and media as the baddies, and the war as a myth and a conspiracy theory and all made up, it exists, and we did not start the war. They did. Complete intolerance of counterpoints of view, attacks on free speech, and now the misinformation and disinformation laws, the definition of disinformation being any content that they disagree with. Yes, we have to fight back. There is a culture war going on, and we have to fight before we can't anymore. It's already pretty bad, but there is still hope, and there are cracks in their plan to dominate politics and the law by capturing the culture. So my point number one, politics is downstream of culture, and I would add so is the law, therefore. Public opinion and populism are leading indicators. All right, point number one. So how is culture formed? How is culture formed? It's formed slowly over time by a million tiny steps, or in the case of our culture, it's been death by 1,000 cuts, or a million cuts. The left side of politics knows this full well, none more so than the extremist feminists. They've been at it hard for the past 60 years, and they have won. We must fight back, but to do so, we first need to understand where the playing fields are. And it's not on election day handing out how to vote cards at the ballot box. It's every single day. Changing the ideas and assumptions and thinking, that is what leads to healthy political and legal reform. And we now have the power of the media literally in our hands for a little while longer, at least. Social media has empowered the masses, and the elites hate that they cannot control what we see and hear as much as they used to anymore. But we better get cracking. With the radical feminists know the power of social media, like the mad effing witches. 63,000 followers on X alone. Here's what they said during their campaign to have this conference shut down earlier this year. I hope you can read it, because I don't want to have to read it out aloud. Can everybody read that at the back? I'll just let you read that for a second. It's delightful. Oh, that's a bit too close. Nice try. All right, so we're the bad guys. The mad effing witches uses an army of people, and it only needs to be a few hundred or even dozens to call companies and media outlets and advertisers and scare the crap out of them. And it works, despite the fact that their bark is worse than their bite. 9 media, who own all the conservative, or what used to be the conservative radio stations, have massively shifted their editorial stance to the centre. They'd do it more if they could capture an audience under 50, but they're having trouble with that. Even Sky News is far more cautious about offending the woke cultural ruling class, lest they lose their YouTube revenues that Google provides and their sponsors. And who could blame them? It is a terrible state of affairs. But we can turn the tables on them, because it does only take a few. But the key is organisation and professionalism. Amplify what good people who know what they're doing are already doing. Don't just like a post, share it as far and wide as you can. Set up an anonymous account on social media if you're worried about personal or professional impacts. But please do something. The dominant socialising institutions that shape culture have all been captured by the left over the past 60 years, and it may take us almost as long to gain them back, but we are now turning the tide, so that's a start. They are, firstly, education, primary to tertiary, and we see the encroachment into primary now, of course, with the gender ideology. Number two, media, obviously, so the mainstream media and social media. Number three, the family influence, the kitchen table. And number four, religion, the decline of Christianity in the West. So don't think it doesn't matter if you don't push back at your kid's school when you see ideology being shoved at them that you don't agree with. Be brave, speak up, find allies, they do exist, and you'll be surprised. And as the MFWs say, it can be fun. Number two, media, don't think it doesn't matter what you say on social media. It does. Repost and support those who are sticking their necks out for the things you believe in. Set up an anonymous account if you like, and get active, not passive, and get rowdy like the witches. Be prepared to get into the mud. Be colloquial. Be a bit rude. Number three, don't think it doesn't matter when the family all eat dinner in their own rooms on their own devices. Insist the family do all meet at the same time every day as much as is humanly possible for a sit-down dinner and conversation. Find out what kids are thinking, challenge their ideas, promote polite, healthy, open debate, and encourage real critical thinking over the Marxist critical theory that they may be having shoved at them at university or school. Oh no, that's hard. I've got teenagers. And number four, don't let people mock your core values and spiritual beliefs unchallenged. Christianity in particular is often mocked for sexism that doesn't really exist in proper interpretations of scripture, and sexual crimes that are not unique or special in just Christian institutions, but sadly can be found in all institutions, especially those of the state. Just a word about presumption of innocence before I come to my second point. To protect the presumption of innocence in the courts of law, we must first defend it in the courts of public opinion. The court of public opinion is not an official court, of course, it's a metaphor, but it is a real thing. It does exist, and the rules of the game are very different to the courts of law, and not in a good way. As Dahlia Lithwick, the host of Slate's US legal podcast Amicus, once noted, in the court of public opinion there are no rules of evidence, no burdens of proof, no cross-examinations, no standards of admissibility. Also, please be aware that in the court of public opinion, choosing silence or doubt is itself a prosecutable offence. It has no rules, no arbiter, no mechanism at all for separating truth from lies. It allows everything into evidence and has no mechanism to separate facts about the case from the experiences and political leanings of the millions of us who are all acting as witnesses, judges, and jurors. Okay, point number two today. How the game is played in terms of the content. News and PR are games of narratives. People make sense of the world based on the stories that they tell themselves about the way life is. We change our stories as we grow and learn. Again, the left fully understand this. Zali Steggall in Parliament last week, I don't know if you saw it, but she was telling the story of her constituent, Mohammed of Manly, and his tragic tale being a Palestinian refugee. It was powerful stuff. It was humanising the narrative, thereby dehumanising, this is how it works, dehumanising anyone who dares to say, well, maybe it might not be a good idea to just open our borders to 3,000 refugees without proper screening from a vastly different cultural background. Instantly, that poor fool becomes the villain in the narrative, the heartless, racist bastard, against the kind-hearted, compassionate hero, Zali. Our intrepid fake independent from the Teal Party, our fake centre-right actual lefty who votes with the Greens 2/3 of the time, according to recent research. Now, if you happen to want to counter-attack Zali for that horrible slur of racism that we just always let through to the keeper, as Peter Dutton did, she'll then play the sexism card, which she did in Parliament. She said, you're not respecting a female in this chamber. Well, she didn't say that directly, but she implied it, right? You're speaking over me. So it's more or less saying, you know, you're being a typical evil, misogynist Liberal Party MP. So you can see they're seizing the moral high ground and they're reframing the narrative. yet again. Now, Peter Dutton is actually one of the first Liberal leaders who actually gets what's going on here and knows how to play the game. ScoMo wasn't very good at it. I'd go so far as to say hopeless at it. As are, unfortunately, all the Liberal state opposition leaders, which is all of them, by the way, in opposition. I mean, they haven't won an election for a very, very long time. Senator Jacinta Price, and they should pay attention, by the way, to the women of the Northern Territory. Senator Jacinta Price and the new Chief Minister, Leo Finocchiaro, they get it too, like Peter Dutton does. Narratives come from drama. Drama comes from conflict. Drama is entertaining, so entertaining that we even create fake conflict, that is, fiction, movies, and most of all, sport. And we go on a journey, we engage with that narrative. It's a journey in which we become emotionally connected to the characters and we back the good guy in their battle against the baddie. Our team versus the other team. So a good narrative is a simple binary. Journalists know this and they will amplify it, oversimplifying complex issues for a very impatient audience. Here are some of the dominant narrative paradigms that you'll see over and over again in our newspapers and TV and online. Hero versus villain, victim versus perpetrator, good girls versus bad boys, poor versus rich, con artist versus ripped off victim, the powerless versus the powerful, the classic Marxist oppressed versus the oppressor, boss versus worker, foreigner versus local. Do they sound familiar? The thing to remember is that news is a construct. It's manufactured and crafted by journalists and by PR people, by political parties and political staffers. If you watched a lot of the Brittany Higgins coverage, you'll have noticed a woman standing beside Brittany in almost every TV shot. That was her friend, Emma Webster. Just so happens that Emma is a director at the Labor-leading public relations, government relations lobbying firm Hawker Britton. She's the Melbourne office head and second in charge to Simon Banks, the managing director in Sydney. And she has an interesting past. Before starting at Hawker Britton as a senior lobbyist, Ms Webster was a top advisor for former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews, and Federal MP and Minister Katie Gallagher, when she was the ACT Chief Minister. Now let me be very clear here. There is no wrongdoing. I'm not implying any wrongdoing. It is totally okay to hire public relations support when you're in the media spotlight. It's also okay to be a Labor supporter and to work for the Labor Party, which she did. Before starting at Hawker Britton as a senior lobbyist, Ms Webster was a top advisor, as I said, for Julia Gillard, Dan Andrews and Katie Gallagher. Now, all of this information started to become a little bit public. Only Sky News and the Daily Mail discussed it, I think. It's important that the public don't get the wrong idea and think that this might have had anything to do with the false narrative that the Brittany Higgins case was part of some designed political conspiracy. So you might want to do a little PR campaign of your own to demonstrate that, in fact, the two of you have a genuine, long-lasting, close friendship, right? Maybe even, I don't know, start a business together. It's a beautiful love story. And Emma is the hero in this narrative, particularly when we read about how much of a wonderful support she was to Brittany through all of the trauma and difficulty that she experienced. And she supported her a lot, as that little sidebar piece illustrates. Okay, so controlling the narrative. How do we do this? First, identify the narrative that's now dominant. Who is the hero character and who is the villain? Second, seek to set new, simple narratives on your terms. Don't follow the narrative your opponents set. If there's anybody in the audience from the Liberal Party, can I just repeat, do not follow the narrative your opponents set. Thank you. If you can't set the narrative, reframe it so that you're the hero character. To do this, identify the moral premise. and seize the moral high ground early. There's always a moral premise and a moral high ground that the hero in any narrative holds. They're fighting for something, right? Something good, something noble, something worthy. So what are you fighting for? How do you make that known? Unless you're purely evil, your intentions are always good. So always emphasize your own hero position. There's no need to fake it, right? Just keep it real, keep it authentic, and keep it sincerely and genuinely moral, and you'll be fine. All right, my third and final point today is keep it simple and keep it emotional. Let me deal with the need for simplicity first. We live in a world of information overload, and there's a massive gap now between the information that's available out there and the capacity of people to consume it. So while everybody says, you know, we can all be media, there's so much information, you can consume everything, we haven't evolved brains yet. Maybe the kids are these days, who knows, but we haven't evolved brains yet that can actually take in more information or take in as much information that's out there. So that gap's getting bigger, which means that we really do have to kind of find ways to grab people's attention and hold their attention. And I haven't got time to go into how you do that today, but you can imagine. Be careful about how many points you try to put into any presentation, okay? The golden rule is 3. The sad news is that reality is even worse than that. That's the maximum. The average is actually 1 to 2 that people will remember 10 minutes after they hear a speaker talking for less than 20 minutes. And it's often 0, by the way. The late great marketing guru Jack Trout tried to hammer this home at an advertising industry conference in America back in the 90s. So I just want to play you a little video of Jack speaking. Can we make that click go? Oh, I went too far. There we go.
So it has to make sense to people when you go out and tell your story. Put it on paper. You got to get it down on paper. It's storytelling. You got to be able to put that story down. Simple, direct, not long and complicated. I mean, one of my great stories is one of the famous Hollywood producers in the movie business. People were always coming up to him, he said, with an idea for a movie. And he said, what I did is I gave them my business card. And I said, put it on the back of the card and send it back to me. And the average person, he said, would say, I can't put this idea on the back of a business card. And he said, if you can't put it on the back of a business card, you don't have a good idea for a movie. You got to keep it simple and write it down. The next thing is, does it explode in people's minds? In other words, in essence, positioning. Does it really register within people's minds? Does it really help? I get it. So that's it. It's simple. That's the key here. It has to explode or get into people's minds very quickly and easily.
So keep it simple. Remember I said earlier, the media do binary narratives, black and white, no greys, no complexity. So thank God we have courts of law and rules of evidence and the presumption of innocence. What the left understand better than anything is the power of emotion over rationality. So I'm going to finish with a quick video on that. They didn't always realize that. Professor Drew Weston is a leading US psychology academic who literally co-wrote the textbook that's used most widely in American universities for Psych 101. Professor Weston also worked as a political consultant and advisor to the Democrats in the 2008 campaign to elect Barack Obama. And he published a book that year about neuroscience and communication and politics called The Political Brain, which he promoted in this 2008 story on CBS News.
Change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.
Few politicians in history were as gifted as Ronald Reagan at going straight to the voters' hearts. Making that emotional connection verbally and non-verbally is more important than ever. And everywhere you look, candidates are communicating with that in mind.
that I believe.
Whether it's a candidate's arched brow, the way he holds his head, or how she injects humor.
So there is a disagreement.
Well, I'll talk to him later.
These are all critical to the way voters respond. Substance still matters, but it's not what ultimately gets someone elected, according to consultant John Neffinger.
You instantly size somebody up based on their posture, their facial expression, the way they carry themselves. All of these things give you a gut level sense about somebody. And that's what it is that voters are reacting to at the end of the day when they choose between one candidate and the other.
Call it the year of the feeling candidate who understands the importance of emotional appeal. It's simple, says author Drew Weston.
If you want to win the hearts and minds of voters, you better start with their heart, because otherwise they're not going to be listening to much about what's on your mind.
That's the advice he's given a number of Democratic candidates. Who exactly, he won't say, but he does say there is scientific proof that when voters make choices, it's not about an intellectual connection.
So where the brain isn't lit up is all up here and down here, which are essentially the thinking circuits of the brain. That's basically the dead zone in much of politics. And you can plug away at those 2 millimeters of neural turf if you want through an entire election. You do that and you're going to lose.
Weston says Democrats should be warmer and less wonky, unlike Michael Dukakis when asked if he would favor the death penalty if his wife were murdered.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Do you have feelings? Are you a man? Do you respond the way a normal man responds when asked a question like that?
But today's candidates seem to be listening to Weston's advice.
My dad had real grace. He never, ever gave up.
So I know what it's like to watch a loved one suffer.
You know, I'm from a middle-class family in the middle of the country.
And it's okay to show that you don't have all the answers. Weston says John Edwards aced this response to a question about gay marriage.
But I personally have been on a journey on this issue. I feel enormous conflict about it.
I think it was a great response. And I think the reason it was a great response was because he showed honesty.
Do you think if candidates are honest and forthcoming and true to themselves, people forgive positions they don't necessarily agree with?
Yes, in fact, the data are crystal clear on this. People prefer someone who shares their values, but what they don't like is someone who doesn't display theirs, who you don't know where they stand on things.
But being too human, too spontaneous, can and will be used against you. Hillary Clinton's laugh has been analyzed this week, even mocked by Jon Stewart.
What's your response?
I wonder if you want to respond to the former mayor.
Would have.
I'm joyful.
The bottom line, Weston believes, is authenticity counts. And most of all, he says, candidates should go for words that will send hearts soaring, not heads spinning.
I don't remember Martin Luther King's "I have a plan" speech. I do remember "I have a dream." And what Democrats need to remember is that if people don't dream with you, they're not going to listen to your 16-point plan.
Yep. I have a dream, right? Not I have a plan. And if they don't dream with you, they won't listen to your 16-point plan. So the two takeaways from that video are, one, it's heart before head. It's not heart without head, right? You've got to have the rational backup argument as well, but you've got to get attention. You've got to emotionally engage people first. And boy, have we got that in spades here today, right? So there's plenty of material to work with. The second thing is to just remember to keep it real, to keep it genuine and authentic, so that it doesn't come across, particularly these days since 2008. Okay, so just to finish up, just to recap the 3 points that I made, so perhaps you'll remember them. First one, politics and law are downstream of culture, so we've got to fight the culture war harder than the feminists and the left do. Secondly, identify the narrative, the moral premise, and the characters in the narrative. And thirdly, keep all of your communications simple and focus on emotionality and authenticity. Thanks very much for your time.
Wonderful stuff, Damian, and thank you very much. I think we can all learn from that and act on that very helpful advice.